Hi, everyone. We're going to give it maybe 30 seconds while people join the Zoom, and then we will get started. All right, maybe we'll give it 15 seconds instead of 30 for the sake of time. Hey, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar today on 2025 Procurement State Legislative Tracking. My name is Alana Hadland. I'm an industry coordinator at the Great Plains Institute on the Industrial Innovation and Carbon Management team. For those of you who might not be familiar with the Great Plains Institute, also known as GPI, GPI is an organization dedicated to crafting nonpartisan, pragmatic energy solutions that benefit people, the economy, and the environment. I'm joined today by my colleague Emma, who will help advance slides and keep an eye on the Q&A, as well as two external speakers that I'm excited to introduce shortly. Next slide, please. So to get us started, just a quick overview of what today's webinar will cover. I'm going to do a little bit of scene setting and look at the legislative landscape since GPI started tracking procurement bills a few years ago. And then I'll share a bit about how we approached the analysis of 2025 bills and share a few resources as well as the policy trends that we tracked. And then, as I said, we're really pleased to welcome speakers both from Washington State as well as BuiltCold. And they're going to share some insights about what it looks like as states start moving from policy design into implementation. And we'll specifically be looking at Washington State's Buy Clean, Buy Fair law as an example. And then we'll have time at the end for question and answer. Next slide, please. So this graph provides a really high-level view of the number of low-carbon procurement bills that we've tracked over the past few years at GPI. You'll hear me say bills a lot, so just noting that that's a shorthand for all of the legislative activity that we track, and it includes both companion bills as well as some resolutions. So that blue line shows the number of bills that were introduced and considered, and then the green line show the number that were enacted. And while that green line of enacted legislation has held pretty steady over the past few years, there's been a pretty noticeable jump between 2024 and 2025. And so Emma and I like to joke that we're just getting that much better at tracking. But all jokes aside, we have really seen that states have traditionally and historically been leaders in buy clean and low carbon procurement conversations. And so there are a couple of factors that might be influencing that jump, including that we also saw a lot of companion bills being considered in both chambers. And so a lot of, again, factors that could contribute to it, but definitely something that we noticed looking at last year's trends. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, just some additional context, and this slide actually might be familiar if you joined our webinar last year, but states have historically been leaders in terms of buy clean policies, which are sort of a flagship model for low carbon procurement. And so I just wanted to share some of the context that there was a progression of partnership, federal and state partnership in terms of buy clean that started in December of 2021 with an executive order. And then there again was 13 states that were part of this partnership with the federal government looking to advance buy clean activities. And then that activity was ended essentially with Executive Order 14057 being rescinded in earlier 2025. But really the key takeaway here is that states have historically been leaders on buy clean. And so that federal context is really just to sort of inform how this conversation has evolved in the months following January of 2025. On the right-hand side there, you can see that California was the first state to pass a buy clean policy in 2017. And then several other states have followed since. And we've also seen both Massachusetts and Hawaii start to consider bills related to a formal buy clean policy in their respective states. Next slide, please. So this chart provides additional insight into the status of the 48 low carbon procurement bills that we tracked in terms of where they stood at the end of 2025. And so we can see that of the 48, 31 were still in an introduced or pre-filed status. And then selectively, bills progressed through the legislative process. And then this column, sort of the far left or second from the left, shows that 5 of the bills were enacted or passed. And so I will note that we are tracking this nationwide, so it's really a high-level view. And folks on the call, I know, are often very tied to the state or bill level conversations. For those who might not be, but want to learn more, we definitely encourage you to explore our legislative tracker. It's designed to be a really great one-stop shop, and so it has links to all of the state legislative websites for the bills on it, and you can really dive in and look at how individual conversations progressed and some of the factors that contributed to why some of these bills advanced more than others. Next slide, Emma. This map shows where the legislative activity occurred. And so we tracked bills that were distributed across 15 states nationwide. And you can see there are some regional pockets here. And so on the West Coast, South, Southwest, some in the Midwest, as well as the East and the Northeast part of the country. And this is a mix also of states with existing buy clean frameworks, for example, California, Washington, Colorado, Minnesota, and also those who don't have the buy clean framework, but are still considering other options for low carbon procurement policy. Next slide, please. And then we saw 5 states that passed legislation related to low carbon procurement. And again, we're seeing a lot of overlap here with states that do have buy clean laws. So just noting that that is something that we saw in 2025. Hawaii was a state that doesn't officially have a buy clean law, but has started to look into it, which I'll share a little bit more in a moment. And then New Jersey, there's not a buy clean law framework per se, but they have passed legislation that does directly support low carbon cement and concrete. Next slide, please. So getting into the analysis, there were really 3 categories that stood out. And we used this to analyze the bills that we tracked in 2025. The first, studies, pilots, and data building. This is really states seeking to learn before regulating or incentivizing. So this is typically, from our experience, more of an early stage policy that is informing what comes next. The second category is buy clean style requirements, and we chose buy clean style because it captures both that sort of well-known buy clean framework as well as policies that might not go buy clean, but that they are achieving similar outcomes in their design. And then the final category is financial incentives and market mechanisms. And so this is where we're seeing states really looking at ways to build capacity to broaden existing programs as well. So while bills typically don't fit neatly in a single bucket, there's pretty good alignment with the procurement bills that we've tracked. And we did ultimately just try to capture the primary intent of the bills to fit them into one of these 3 categories for the purpose of the webinar. Next slide, please. This is a similar piece of what we've already looked at, I should say, but essentially showing you the 3 categories and then the number of bills that fell in each category. So the blue bar shows you the total bills in each of those 3 categories, and the gray shows you the number that were enacted, or I believe in one case, a resolution that was adopted. And we can quickly see that that final category, financial incentives and market mechanisms, had the most legislative activity in 2025. Next slide, please. So diving into the first category, studies, pilots, and data building. Across these bills, we saw states that were really considering ways to study whether or not it was feasible and how to go about implementing different low carbon procurement methods. So you can see the dark purple, there were 8 bills that fell in this category, and then 1 resolution, in this case, I believe, that was adopted. Next slide. So the first slide here has examples of bills in Category 1 that were introduced and considered, but none of these passed. So just high level on the right side shows that the types of things that states were looking to study or learn more about would be how to expand construction requirements to require more sustainable building products, studying the feasibility of implementing Buy Clean, and also there was an example of a state looking to study the impact of carbon pricing mechanisms. And then on the left in the purple box, we have several examples. For the sake of time, and we'll share these slides after the webinar, I think I'll just pull one or two from each category. In this case, there were two bills from Hawaii. And again, this was a study. Hawaii was looking at the feasibility of implementing a Buy Clean state policy and program. In this case, should the bill have been passed, there would have been a report due by the 2027 legislative session. And then it was interesting to note within the bill text that Hawaii specifically noted Buy Clean policies in California, Colorado, Oregon, and Washington as examples. Next slide, please. And then this slide has an example from our first category of a resolution that was adopted, studies, pilots, and data building. And so in this case, Hawaii HR 184, and you can see there are actually a series of resolutions looking at the same issue and proposing a similar next step. And so in a quote, there's directly from the bill, but the resolution, excuse me, essentially the state was acknowledging that landfills were nearing capacity and that construction and demolition waste contribute a lot toward what goes into landfills nationwide. And so Hawaii has established a demolition waste reduction working group that's a combination of both public and private stakeholders that's really looking at ways to address this, with some of the focuses being around reducing construction and demolition waste, and also supporting a more circular economy, which often is focusing on that embodied carbon and how to reuse materials to address some of those goals. Next slide, please. Our second category is Buy Clean style requirements. So again, this is a category where we saw states considering either formal Buy Clean frameworks or mandating other reporting requirements, different procurement standards, and also how to reduce embodied carbon emissions. In this category, we saw six states that put forward 13 different bills, and you can see that in the bar chart as well. Next slide, please. So a few examples. Again, these are states where bills were introduced and considered, but none of these examples passed in 2025. Just some high-level takeaways on the right. In this case, we saw states considering how to expand construction requirements for more sustainable building products, how to implement a Buy Clean policy, also maximum acceptable global warming potential for different materials and construction projects, as well as environmental product declarations. And then to share some of the examples, again, I won't go through all of these, but you can see that these conversations are happening across the country. An example from California was looking at requiring emissions reporting for large and significant contractors that were doing business with the state. Looking a little further down in Massachusetts, H3325 was looking at establishing, and I shouldn't say looking, was proposing to establish a formal Buy Clean Massachusetts program. And then looking a little bit further down, there was a set of bills in New York that would have added embodied carbon emission reduction requirements into the state building code with a phased-in approach with certain targets for 2030 and additional targets for 2033. Next slide, please. And then an example, we had one bill that was enacted in this category in Washington, so SB 5195. We were tracking, it was a broader capital budget bill, but there was a new section that caught our eye, and it was focusing on accelerating the reduction of embodied carbon and improving the environmental performance of construction materials. And so this is from our tracking, at least more of a directive rather than mandated approach, but is really encouraging agencies whenever possible to review and consider embodied carbon reported in environmental product declarations, often referred to as EPDs, when evaluating proposed structural materials for construction projects. Next slide, please. And then this is our final category, financial incentives and market mechanisms. Across this category, we saw states that were considering ways to provide direct financial incentives to encourage low carbon procurement, as well as some other mechanisms to support and expand the market for low carbon procurement and other related materials. So in this category, we saw 10 states that put forward 27 related bills. And then similar to the last few graphs, we can also see that visually with the blue bar capturing the 27 total bills, and then the gray bar capturing the 3 that were enacted. Next slide, please. All right, following that model, we have here some examples of bills that were introduced and considered, but none of these passed in 2025. So very high level on the right, there are states considering appropriations, fees, how to use incentive programs or other program funds, as well as tax credits or exemptions to encourage low carbon procurement. And that's both directly with the state as the purchaser, but also sometimes the state leveraging government budgets or spending or public dollars to help encourage kind of economy-wide behavior that will also provide more low carbon materials. A few examples, the first being Connecticut, HB 6784 would require the establishment of a program to incentivize contractors to specifically use low embodied carbon concrete. And then a little bit further down, we see a similar target with concrete in Pennsylvania, which is HB 1711, which would establish a low embodied carbon concrete performance incentive program. And then also in Texas, as the final example on this slide, there were a pair of bills that were introduced that would establish a grant program that would specifically reimburse ready-mix concrete manufacturers for costs associated with environmental product declarations, otherwise called EPDs. Next slide, please. And then 3 examples of legislation that did pass in 2025 in this category. And we'll just run through these quickly, but encourage you all to dive into these and kind of track their development now that they've become law. In Colorado, the bill that passed defined embodied carbon and then did 2 things. So embodied carbon was added to a list of improvements for new energy improvements that became eligible essentially for property assessed clean energy financing in the state. And then it also modified an existing industrial clean energy tax credit so that embodied carbon improvement investments qualified as greenhouse gas emissions reductions improvements. So this was an interesting example of broadening access and kind of adjusting definitions to leverage existing incentives to a greater extent. And then in Minnesota, HF 14 was part of a broader transportation and finance policy bill, and they're included within it a line just over $300,000 to assist manufacturers in obtaining environmental product declarations for certain materials. And then a small portion of that, additionally, I should say, was for any reasonable costs for administering that section of the bill. And then finally in New Jersey, we also tracked this bill, I should say, under hydrogen. So there is some overlap here. In that case, hydrogen is a qualified technology, but through our procurement lens, this bill in New Jersey established a Next New Jersey manufacturing program, which was a pretty significant comprehensive tax credit program that supports a really wide range of industries. And within that, there is a good portion carved out for clean energy product manufacturers during the first 2 years. And so this definitely leans more in the market mechanism, but it is something that we want to track and find very interesting as far as adding to the conversation of how are public dollars helping to influence the market more broadly, which can. And if you can hear me, will you do the next slide? Otherwise, oh, I think
Hi,
it is my
Alana.
internet. Shoot.
Sorry, hopping in. You froze there for a moment, Alana.
Thank you. I thought that it was me after my computer told me it was me.
No, all good.
What did we miss? Where did we leave off?
That is an excellent question. I think if you could just start back with New Jersey,
Okay.
that would
I
be
see a
excellent.
hand up. Maybe someone else has some insight or they're trying to also tell me I froze. Okay, we'll do New Jersey. Um, oh, we missed 3 sentences. Thank you very much. Okay. Quick recap of New Jersey. So this bill established the next New Jersey manufacturing program. It's a very comprehensive tax credit program. It covers a wide range of industries, and there is 500 million in tax credit available, but a good portion of that is carved out for clean energy product manufacturers in the first 2 years. So just underscoring that we also are tracking this in hydrogen as an example of kind of the crossover that we see, but public dollars influencing markets more broadly we think is an important add to a conversation about how do we generate markets where low carbon materials are more widely available. Okay, now can we do the next slide? Thanks, Emma. So cross-cutting takeaways, this is really just how we saw in 2025 is informing what we're looking for in 2026. So we've seen that interest continues to grow. Conversations around low carbon procurement are happening at higher rates. But as we saw in that first graph, enactment of bills remains pretty selective and pretty steady around 4 or 5 a year. We really do anticipate seeing that progression of states wanting to study the feasibility of low carbon procurement policy and then moving into exploring something more formal, like a Buy Clean framework. We've definitely seen this in previous states that have enacted Buy Clean, that often these bills are introduced over consecutive years before something is passed, simply because the conversations evolve. There are a lot of factors that go into that. And then also anticipating more ways that states will keep exploring how they can leverage government purchasing power to influence both public procurement behavior and how the state is approaching procurement, but also private procurement and how they can influence and support specific markets. And then the last thing is we're expecting to see more insight. So as states have passed legislation around low carbon procurement, we're going to gain a lot of really helpful insights and get to watch what moving toward implementation looks like. Next slide. I'm going to go through this pretty quick here. We just wanted to remind folks that we have been tracking bills since 2023. All of those trackers are still available. So there's some carry over between years, but you can definitely dig into these and explore. And then please do subscribe to our 2026 digest. We send that usually weekly. We aim for Tuesday mornings. So it's a nice complement to just keep folks updated on major bill activity as things progress during the session. Next slide, please. And then this is just a view if you've not been on the tracker. Our goal is to really make tracking these bills accessible for everyone. So there's an interactive map you can click into a single state, and then you can see bills both across low carbon procurement, but also carbon management and hydrogen, which are the other two categories that we track. Next slide. And then this is just one more view. So you can do a lot of sorting and filtering within the tracker itself. You can also export the information in the tracker and work with it in Excel if you would prefer. Yeah, next slide. Okay, I am very pleased to now welcome our external speakers. So we are going to first welcome Hanna Waterstrat. Hanna is the Director of the State Efficiency and Environmental Performance Office at the Washington State Department of Commerce. Hanna, I will turn it over to you. Thanks for being with us today.
All right. Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Looks good. Okay. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I'm Hanna Waterstrat, and I'm really happy to be here today to talk about the work we're doing to implement our Buy Clean and Buy Fair law. Next slide, please. Just wanted to quickly let you know that my office is part of the Washington Department of Commerce. We're the state energy office, and we work in partnerships with other commerce programs to strengthen communities in Washington state. Next slide, please. Our Buy Clean and Buy Fair journey has included more than 6 years of research, policy development, legislative coordination, and implementation. It started with a study in 2019, then with a bill that was introduced and didn't pass, then with a pilot study. The bill finally passed in March of 2024, and we're now working to implement this new law. Before I jump into the details of the law and all the things that we're working on, I just want to mention that Buy Clean and Buy Fair is funded through revenue provided by Washington's Climate Commitment Act, which is our state's cap and invest program. Next slide, please. All right, so some of the key ingredients on our Buy Clean and Buy Fair law are building awareness and education about embodied carbon. So before the bill even passed, we'd worked with the U.S. Climate Alliance and the Carbon Leadership Forum to develop a series of educational videos and model reporting specifications that are posted on our website. We developed these with a state government audience in mind, and they've been very helpful for capital project developers, public works project managers, and project teams. But I also use the educational videos to onboard new team members, to educate state agency leadership, and even elected officials. Embodied carbon is a complex topic that's new to many of our partners. So having supportive resources to demystify it has been really helpful. Also, data collection and reporting is a big part of this work, as is ongoing collaboration with a broad range of partners. We just issued our first legislative report with a focus on growing low carbon materials manufacturing and have another report due in September 2026. And as we get more data in the door and more data and more experience with this work, we'll get the chance to use those lessons learned to update our reporting standards in 2027. Next slide, please. Okay, so I want to go over some of the basics of our Buy Clean and Buy Fair law. Covered projects are buildings only. These are state agency and higher education new building construction projects. And in the first 2 years of reporting, those are projects over 100,000 square feet. And then starting in 2027, that threshold drops to 50,000 square feet. The covered products in Washington state are concrete, wood, and steel. Next slide, please. Speaking of concrete, this bill also includes a provision that mandates that our project teams move from prescriptive specifications for concrete to performance-based specifications, with a few exceptions. Next slide, please. So I want to talk a little bit about our reporting requirements in Washington state. So if you are a covered project and you have covered products, the submittals that we're asking for are some basic project information. So name and location of the facility, product quantity for every covered product that you used, a current EPD, and we're asking for supply chain specific EPDs if they're available. And if they're not, we will accept facility or product specific EPDs. We're also asking for the manufacturer information, so name and location, And then some supplier workforce data from those manufacturers. So those are names and locations of production facilities, and also information about the workforce, so number of full, part-time, and temporary employees. And then if these things are available, so we're asking also for health product declarations, a supplier code of conduct. And this is kind of specific to our state, but I'm sure there are proxies in many other states for any Office of Minority and Women-Owned Business Enterprises certifications. You may be wondering what is not included in reporting requirements. In Washington State, our Buy Clean and Buy Fair bill, or our law, is what we call a reporting-only law. So we're not asking for folks to procure materials below a certain GWP threshold. We're not covering any kind of transportation infrastructure, and we also don't include any requirements related to whole building life cycle assessment. Next slide, please. One of the things that I find really valuable with our work is that we have a statutory directive to establish a technical work group. And this work group is intended to identify opportunities for and barriers to growth of the use of and production of low carbon materials, and also to promote high labor standards in manufacturing and expand low carbon materials manufacturing in Washington. Next slide, please. This is a pretty diverse group, so it includes representatives from all three of our covered industries, also from state agencies, from environmental groups, from labor unions, from architecture, engineering, and construction businesses, from minority and women-owned businesses, and also by the University of Washington Life Cycle Labs and Carbon Leadership Forum. Next slide, please. We're also required to do some research and reporting. So we just completed and have made available our Buy Clean and Buy Fair low carbon manufacturing plan. And then we're getting started on another reporting cycle, which that legislative report is due in September 2026. That will include information on policy trends and recommendations, some recommendations around promoting the use of low carbon concrete and cement. We're also going to take another look at how we can support manufacturing jobs and explore some workforce data collection. We're also going to be reviewing the data that we've collected so far and seeing what that tells us. And then there's also going to be some recommendations in this report for improving EPD data quality, for recommendations for mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions at manufacturing facilities, and then also some information about design-based approaches to reducing embodied carbon. I want to mention also that we're very super fortunate to have support on all of these research and reporting tasks from the University of Washington Life Cycle Labs and Carbon Leadership Forum. Next slide, please. Okay, and I'm going to let Taylor from BuiltCold provide more of the exciting details on our database project, but just wanted to cover a few basics. So in the statute for Buy Clean and Buy Fair, the requirements about the database are that it be publicly accessible. So not the whole entire thing or the reporting part of it, but that we publish some dashboards about our program and provide some basic information about what we're doing. And then the main point of data that it asks us to publish on our website is the global warming potential of different materials that we procured and installed in state projects as reported in the EPDs that we've collected. The project team for this database project includes BuiltCold, who you will hear from shortly. We're also working with Building Transparency and the HBD Collaborative on this project. On the commerce side, I have some team members supporting this project and also working with our IT project managers at the agency. And then we're also consulting with state agency project managers and other experts as needed because we wanted to integrate a little bit of that early user perspective. We'll be working on this. We're working on it right now. We're working to put together some focus group meetings to get some more user input. And this project will be complete sometime later this month. So this is really exciting. I just want to mention, a couple things before I hand things over to Taylor. We're super excited. So the way that this database is described in statute, we're really only required to develop a reporting tool that captures data submitted before each project is completed and occupied. So, just just give us your EPDs, give us your project information, and then get on out of there. What was really cool about this project is that project owners can access the database tool earlier in the project development process for support with procurement, as it can help them explore different material choices that are available in our region, including the global warming potential of these available materials. So I know that our project teams are going to be super excited to get some experience with this tool and try that out. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about, the lessons learned. Oh, next slide, please. Sorry about that. Jumping right ahead to some lessons learned and practical insights. So the statute gives us the ability to maintain and refine the database and to update reporting standards and requirements. So this is kind of giving us a practical way that we can leverage all of these lessons learned and make some changes and tweaks over the next year or two. So a couple of the things that we've learned with our square footage threshold, it's pretty high. In Washington State, we're also enduring a little bit of a budget shortfall. So we don't have a lot of those really large projects in the pipeline right now. So we're working on trying to encourage voluntary reporting of smaller projects. Also, since we started this work, at the very beginning of the journey, we have seen a real increased availability of EPDs, so that's really exciting. And then I also want to emphasize the importance of partnerships and cross-sector collaboration. So I mentioned already our technical work group. We also have a regional collaborative group through the Pacific Coast Collaborative Task Force on Low Carbon Construction. We also collaborate regularly with the Carbon Leadership Forum and, of course, with our database partner, BuiltCold. And we're going to learn a lot more. So we're not going to stop learning. There's going to be a lot more that we're going to learn, especially in the next year or two, as we really, really jump into this in earnest. And some of the things that we hope to learn include more about what the products we're purchasing in our state actually are and what they look like from a embodied emissions perspective, and about more actions that we may be able to take in the future through policy or other levers that can lower embodied greenhouse gas emissions. So I mentioned we have the opportunity to incorporate these lessons learned, so our future may hold adding GWP limits, expanding to transportation infrastructure and materials like asphalt and glass. We had a current bill, I'm not sure it's going to make it through this year, that was focused around whole building LCA and some other pathways. And we really want to be ready to kind of implement any new policies or actions that may lie ahead. I'm also hoping to continue to learn more about what communication strategies resonate with decision makers, elected officials, and community members, because one thing I'm sure of is that there's definitely more work to do here. So with that, I will go ahead, next slide, and just say thank you to everybody for being here today, and we'll keep it moving to Taylor. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah.
I want to make sure I wasn't okay. Let me get you sharing access, Taylor. And in the meantime, also wanted to thank you, Hannah, very much for being here today and sharing the perspective. I've learned a lot just chatting with you before the webinar, and we're just looking forward to continuing to learn more about Washington's progress and process. So I'm now very happy to welcome Taylor Linnell. Taylor is the co-founder of BuiltCold, and as Hannah had shared, BuiltCold is part of this project team. So Taylor, I'll turn it over to you to talk more about the data.
Thank you. Great to meet you all. I'm excited to be presenting. It's been phenomenal working with Hannah on the Buy Clean and Buy Fair deployment. How we were going to approach our section of the presentation, we're going to go high and things we've been seeing in Buy Clean implementation across the country, and then really focusing on Washington on how we worked with them to implement the Buy Clean and Buy Fair and some of the insights we've uncovered during that partnership and collaboration. But first, to anchor kind of what is BuiltCold. So we're a software platform that is highly specialized because we only focus on government enablement of Buy Clean programs, also known as kind of green public procurement or kind of low embodied carbon programs, wholesale. We started with the federal Buy Clean initiative. The General Service Administration was our first user group to support the IRA-backed Federal By Clean Initiative. And then from there, we've now supported states and are working across all levels of government to make sure that they are able to design and deploy these programs with as minimal cost and complexity as possible. I mean, because as you heard Alana mention, there's lots of challenges around feasibility, accessibility. How do we do this? And our goal is to provide the software so the agencies and policymakers have a much easier time envisioning and following through with some of these amazing intents to lower the material emissions of their construction sector. One thing that we've noticed, though, because we're so specialized in the space, that we get to talk to agencies and policymakers across the country and now across the world, and we started to map certain patterns in terms of how these buy clean policies kind of go from policy development all the way to implementation. And one thing that we're seeing, because we get to kind of get the inside scoop of kind of what the dream is, what the vision is that we're also getting a bit of a insight into where the future is going to be for these bike lane policies and how they can better shape the entire construction sector within that given jurisdiction. And so we've been able to map these four different phases. And so I'll go through the four and then kind of bring it back down to where Washington is and how they're essentially progressing through these phases. But on this chart, you can see we've got market coverage on the left and then time on the bottom. And you'll see a yellow line going through. Essentially, I'll go through four phases and talk about how over time we're seeing more and more market coverage, meaning more and more construction in that sector, in that jurisdiction rather, is having a buy clean or a low embodied carbon component being inputted. So the first phase we see is around public pilots. This is a lot where Alana's legislation was kind of focused on. These are jurisdictions looking just to better understand what's the market feasibility, what is the supplier adaptability to these programs. Is there a high density of EPDs? What does collection look like? Do we have enough data to have a kind of more formalized procurement workflows? And are we able to better ascertain, how we want to approach this? What is the flavor of our bike lane program? And then once they're able to essentially identify those opportunities, and you can see it's a much lower level of market coverage, we then go to the next phase, which is public procurement. So now we're starting to formalize what we learned in the public pilots. And this is where you have for all kind of green public procurement, where you now start to see threshold development. They're setting GVP thresholds. They might be introducing multi-pathway compliance, where they'll have material substitutions or carbon budgets, or maybe even a whole building LCA. They're really starting to fine tune how their procurement processes are adapting for EPD management and embodied carbon tracking more holistically. And then this is really important. We've seen much more of this last bullet around agency alignment and training. In many cases, with the public pilots, you have the administrating agency. They're the ones that are in charge of deploying the Bike Clean program, defining the characteristics, configuring the requirements, and then they then have to cross-educate across different agencies within the state and sometimes at the city or local level. And so there's a lot of work and effort right now of how do we think about simplifying alignment and agency conversations. But imagine all that goes smoothly. You're now seeing more coverage. Essentially, all of public procurement has some sort of low embodied carbon component. And then we move to kind of the private sector. And this is where we see much more of a carrot versus stick approach in many of the jurisdictions that we connect with. And this is where you'll have an incentive for a low carbon program. And so these are the early adopters in the private sector. These are the owner developers. These are the GCs that want to be able to work with EPDs to essentially unlock some sort of incentive. This is where you'll see, I think I'll tie it back to Alana's presentation again, where you have kind of financial mechanisms. This could be a sales tax exemption, a rebate. This might even be some sort of permitting incentive. For instance, for Colorado has the Buy Clean Colorado Act sales tax exemption, where the private sector doesn't have to pay state sales tax on qualifying materials. And then you'll start to see kind of the alignment to the incentive with performance goals. So you'll have tiered thresholds in many cases, where tier A is highly accessible to the vast majority of the market, and then tier B may be more aggressive but has a higher incentive. And so there's different levers you can pull to move the sector along to really kind of entice them to think better about their material choices. And then lastly, we see this scope expansion for mature public programs. Now, this is where we'll see not only the kind of the vertical side or the buildings public sector employ bike lane programs, but also now you have the horizontal or infrastructure transportation agencies as well. So now you have essentially complete coverage in the public sector in this given market. which is then contrasted with the private sector incentives. And the very last stage, this is the goal for all of us. No one's really here yet, but I think this is the dream, is that we get to standard practice where we have full market coverage of a low embodied carbon policy. And how we perceive this is going to be instituted is via draft model green codes, where it's now incorporated in the building code that you have an embodied carbon component to make sure that we're getting the whole sector on board. And I could still see us having some stretch incentives where you're able to reward the ones that are going above and beyond. But now you kind of set the floor, so all construction in the sector, from new builds all the way to major reconstruction and renovation are included. And I bring all this together because this is where we have mapped to Washington. So Washington is squarely in the transition from public privates to public procurement. They have a unique place in these maturity phases because they were able to get a lot of funding with their policy. And so they're able to use tools like BuiltCold to accelerate this pathway. And the overall vision for BuiltCold is that we help truncate this timeline, so it's much faster and easier for our public sector partners to move across these thresholds much sooner and with less cost. So diving into Washington, how did we help them implement? So the very first thing we did is with the BikeLane platform, you have the ability to configure your particular legislation to match what the program rules are going to be. And so with the Department of Commerce, which is the department that Hanna leads in terms of the BikeLane implementation, is that they're able to define through an onboarding workflow with BuiltCold kind of what products are included. We've touched on that there is a 100,000 square foot threshold, but there's also a threshold around major renovation where you have a percent of project cost. Those can be included in the BikeLane and BikeFair rules as well. And then you have a discussion around what materials are included. It's concrete, steel, and wood, but there's discussions of how do we increase those material coverages for BikeLane and BikeFair, and how do we get the data to manage that. And then you have a lot of discussion on EPD requirements. What product category rules are allowed? Do we have certain perspectives on what program operators are included? What is the EPD database source? For Washington, the primary data source is Building Transparency through the EC3 tool, but we have other programs that require different EPD repositories. And kind of was the reporting framework. As Hanna mentioned, this is purely in the reporting stage, so there's no threshold development. They're simply just trying to collect data to better inform the decisions and engage the sector. And as we talked about emission thresholds, what does multi-pathway look like? But ultimately, let's just start to get the data in and map it to kind of our building constructions, building elements and how they're being constructed. And the last thing we support during the onboarding process is if there is an incentive, what does that incentive design look like? Is it a performance bonus? Is it part of the bidding process? There is no incentive for the BCBF, but it is a really important part to think about early on in terms of how you roll out your program. The next step is where I think massive kudos to Hanna and Washington holistically, because they pushed the BuiltCold tool to really adopt to the more unique and innovative parts of the legislation. So we had to build some custom workflows and modules for commerce that went beyond just EPD management and emissions tracking. And I think these are really powerful because I think we'll see more and more jurisdictions uptake these. But as Hanna alluded to, we had to incorporate health product declarations through our partnership with the HBDC Collaborative. This means now that for every project, we're automating the ingestion of HPDs and then making it easy for product teams to manage and assess the compliance of those HPDs. And there's a lot of focus on workplace documentation. This will be repetitive, but we do now support a supplier code of conduct document ingestion. We support the ability for owner certification, document management. And then Hanna and team really pushed us to think about kind of how can we better survey the manufacturers and supply chain related to a project. And so we built a full survey capability to drive more insights from what does your workforce and labor prices look like. And that survey capability could be expanded to different types of questions and initiatives that Commerce wants to deploy. And then lastly, as Hanna alluded to, we're launching this month with the database and workflow engine. So this is going to be really exciting for us. We're getting a lot more information, a lot more data. But I really want to touch on something that the law and also Hanna really wanted us to emphasize is to really minimize the reporting burden. And so we invested a lot in a whole suite of educational and onboarding capabilities to reduce the administrative burden on Hannah's team. So we've built in-app guidance, tutorials, interactive workflows. So the goal for us is to dramatically reduce any sort of questions that have to go back to Hannah's team. So project teams can be kind of self-directed and move as fast as possible, and then also help educate the broader supply chain in Washington on kind of what it requires to get an EPD, what does it look like to comply with Buy Clean and Buy Fair, and ultimately what is the best way to manage all this data to simplify the entire workflow. The last three slides, I'll go quick so we save time for Q&A, but these are three insights that we've uncovered during our relationship and deployment with Washington State. The first one is it's very industry forward. Some jurisdictions have a threshold relatively early in their Buy Clean journey. Washington has a pretty long on-ramp to allow the industry to learn, to better manage their data requirements. And also, this is kind of twofold. One, it's to help support the manufacturers and suppliers in the state. What is an EPD? Roughly, we know that for specific materials that roughly 20% of a producer population in a state only has EPDs. So you still have a vast opportunity for us to educate and onboard the rest of the supply chain with getting EPDs. What's that entail? What does that look like? How do we make sure they can be competitive in a buy clean market? And because of the very industry forward approach Washington has taken, there's a huge on ramp for suppliers as well as project teams to better understand the rules of the road as this comes to market. The next big learning is very early on. The Commerce has had this technical working group, but also a lot of cross-agency communication and support. I think the ultimate goal is to make sure that bike lane programs can be easily transferable as new agencies come online. And we've put a lot of effort and work, and I've been very impressed with how Washington has kind of worked with their partner agencies across the state to make sure that they're informed and available for questions and feedback on the bike lane implementation. And the last key insight is Washington has really pushed the technology side of this more than we've seen in other jurisdictions. And not only is the Buy Clean and Buy Fair law, I think, innovative in the sense that it has HPD requirements, labor requirements, really trying to get a better handle on workplace participation, but it's also pushed the limits of what our platform was initially built to do to support the federal level. So Washington State's gone far beyond what we had to do for the GSA and the Federal Buy Clean Initiative, and made sure that we are developing technologies that make it easier on the practitioners and the supply chain to comply and compete. But I feel like I've been talking forever, so I'll pause and stop sharing to tee up for any Q&A.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Taylor. Thank you, Hannah, Alana, and Taylor for your excellent presentations today. We're now going to turn to questions from the audience about either Taylor or Hannah's presentation or about Alana's low carbon procurement legislative track more broadly. I know we just have a few minutes left here, so we'll try to answer these chronologically as they come in, but we will make sure to reach out to anyone who doesn't have their question answered today after today's webinar and share out all of our resources.
Yeah, thank you, Emma, and thank you everyone for joining the webinar today. And we will share the slides in a recording. And if you do not receive the digest and want to, just reach out to Emma or myself. But ultimately, just really want to give a special thanks again to Hannah and Taylor for sharing the insights and seeing how states are moving from policy to implementation, and really appreciate the work you both do and looking forward to staying in touch. So thanks, everyone. We'll talk to you later.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.